God.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, God, I just need a little dose of applause about every once a week. It's vitamin applause. Yes, welcome back to More Up North. I'm really excited about tonight's show. This is a topic that seems to have been on the minds and thoughts and conversations of Alaskans for a very long time. And Jim Stratton has agreed to come in for an interview, and he is the Alaska Regional Director for the National Parks Conservation Association. And he's been so since December of 2002. Prior to joining the NPCA, Jim spent 7.5 years as the Director of Divisions of Parks and Outdoor Rec for the state of Alaska, and 11 years as the Program and Finance Director for Alaska Conservation Foundation. So you've kind of done your time here.
I have.
And interesting, you've worked for both the state and now the feds.
Well, actually, I don't work for the feds.
You don't?
The National Parks Conservation Association is a private nonprofit organization.
Okay,
we're funded by memberships. So, yeah, we're like a lot of groups in Alaska that engage in that political discourse. We do it from the
But you're sort of the liaison. Well, I shouldn't say liaison, maybe figuring out how the state laws affect the federal lands.
I do that. My job is to really advocate for the National Park Service in all the arenas, because as federal employees, the Park Service is very much hampered in advocating for themselves. So in this kind of ongoing discussion that we're having in the state now about, you know, where do state fish and game laws apply and don't apply and how much they apply, we've really taken a lead in trying to define, you know, what the Park Service can do in terms of kind of pushing back on some of the things that the state of Alaska is doing.
How many acres do we have?
We have 54 million acres of national park land in Alaska, 2/3 of all the national park acres in the entire country.
Isn't that bigger than some states?
It's about the size of the state of Idaho. So yeah, it's bigger
I mean,
than most states.
Yeah, just so we've got sort of a gauge.
Huge. It's
so
huge.
We've got a lot of land here that's tied up for that. So what constitutionally, I know Alaska's been a little bit, I don't know, it seems to be interpreted however people want to use it.
Right.
What it means for us, that everything needs to be used, or the resources need to be used for the good of all Alaskans, sort of this idea. How's that really working out?
Well, the thing that we're looking at is that the state of Alaska has a set of laws that dictate how the Alaska Board of Game and the Department of Fish and Game manage wildlife in the state of Alaska. That is set by the Alaska State Legislature, and it's something called intensive management. Some people are calling it abundance management. It's all about growing moose and caribou so people can go out and hunt them. In order to grow more moose and caribou, you've got to kill wolves and bears. And so there's, you know, that's the state's management philosophy. If we can reduce the number of predators out there, you'll grow more moose and caribou so we can then go out and kill moose and caribou and put them in our freezer. That's the law of the state of Alaska. Now, compared to that, you have on national park lands, and of the 54 million acres that we talked about, a certain number of those, about 19 million acres, are national preserves. Denali National Preserve, Lake Clark National Preserve, Katmai's got one, and you can sport hunt on national preserves. National preserves are just like a capital P park, except sport hunting is allowed. And sport hunting is managed by the Board of Game and the Department of Fish and Game. And so for, you know, decades, the department set the bag limits, it set the season length, it set the methods and means for the harvest of wildlife, and the Park Service said, yeah, that looks fine. When intensive management came in and there began to be this kind of increased pressure on reducing wolf and bear populations in order to grow more moose and caribou.
That was under Murkowski's administration.
Well, actually, it passed in like '93.
Right.
But the Murkowski administration, the one that really cranked it, ramped it up, appointed a board of game that was really interested in driving this predator control train that we're on right now to do those reductions. And you can't do aerial killing of wolves, aerial predator control on national preserves. The Park Service disallows that. So the state of Alaska says, well, we can't fly around in helicopters and, you know, and shoot wolves in national preserves, but we want to reduce the number of wolves and the number of bears. And so they do it by making the bag limits higher, the seasons longer, and other things like allowing bear cubs to be shot, you know, in their dens and things like that, that really one wouldn't think would be happening in a unit of the National Park Service. And so the Park Service, they let the Department of Fish and Game manage the wildlife so far as the rules of the state don't conflict with why the park was established. So as long as they stay reasonable, then the Park Service is perfectly happy to let them set all these rules. Well, when they start kind of getting up against the edge and exceeding the purposes for which the park was established, that's when the Park Service begins to push back. And they go, you know, you can apply that regulation change to your land, but we really would appreciate it if you wouldn't apply it to our land, and to write your state regulation to exempt national park lands. And it's interesting, we've done research since 2001. The Park Service has asked the Board of Game 48 times not to apply a certain regulation to Park Service lands, and 48 times the Board of Game said, well, sorry, no, we're going to implement it anyway. And there's your conflict. You've got the National Park Service, who listens to Congress, saying you need to manage your wildlife for natural and healthy populations. You can't do manipulation of wildlife to benefit another species of wildlife. That's expressly prohibited on national lands. But that's exactly what the state of Alaska is doing. And so you've got this conflict between what the state is doing and what the federal government is doing. And you would think that as adults, they would be able to sit down and have a conversation about, you know, what is it that we can do on Park Service lands with state regulations that the Park Service would agree with. But it hasn't been that way. The Park Service has repeatedly tried to say, will you please not do that on our lands? And the state repeatedly says, sorry, we don't care. We're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, but don't, and just to play devil's advocate for a minute, I mean, I think that a part of that, and I should say that I had moose last night for dinner.
I have moose in my freezer too.
I mean,
so,
you know, I'm a consumer of game. Sure. So that just being said, I think that there's a culture in Alaska. It's certainly been here. I mean, I was born and raised here, and I used to hear about, you know, one of these days we're going to be the People's Republic of Alaska. We're not going to be part of that damn government, you know, and there is this weird pushback, and it's gotten really aggravated in the last couple of years. Well, at least since we've had an African American president, it seems a little bit more prevalent. But you know, how we don't care how they do it outside, that sort of attitude. It's not just from the top down. I mean, it's from the bottom up, and so to just go stuff it. I find it really ironic, though, that we take, you know, so much money from the federal government, and I think we should probably be appreciative of that, since we don't really want to pay, you know, state income tax and all. I mean, we couldn't possibly be taxed high enough to keep up with what we get from the Fed. So, but that whole attitude of, you know, we don't have to listen to Congress about federal lands. This is Alaska, by God. What's the solution? I mean, is there going to be a conversation, or do you think the federal parks are going to have to just be like, okay, we're totally cracking down?
Well, unfortunately, the state of Alaska has pushed the Park Service to the point where they're starting to have to promulgate make their own rules that say that, you know, what the state rules don't apply to us. And I think that's a disservice to hunters, quite honestly. You would think that the hunter in the state of Alaska would want to go to one place where the hunting rules are. And that's what the Park Service has tried to do in working through the Board of Game process, where they, you know, so all of the where you can hunt and can't hunt and how you can hunt is in one set of rules, the state's. And so that's why the Park Service has been working with the Board of Game, trying to get them to incorporate what the Park Service wants in what the state sets out as the hunting regulations. But they're to the point now where the Park Service is saying, well, they're not listening to us. We have an obligation to manage our wildlife for natural and healthy populations. We can't manipulate wildlife. That's clearly what's happening in some instances. And so they're writing their own regulations. So that's what's happening now, is the Park Service is beginning to push back and saying, you know, you might be able to shoot black bears in dens with spotlights, you know, on state land, and shoot cubs and sows with cubs, you know, at their dens on state land. You can't do that on national park managed land. And what I hope is that at some point the state of Alaska is going to realize that cooperation isn't do it our way. That cooperation really means you sit down and have an honest dialogue between two land management agencies, and you try, and the state has got to recognize that the federal government does have some say-so in the way that wildlife is managed in the state of Alaska. There's a very interesting law review article done by the Duke University of Law School, and we of course know in the state of Alaska we love Duke University for all those basketball players.
My mother.
So, right, exactly. Well, they put out a law review article in December 2007 that talks about how the federal government has all the authority in the world to push back on those rules that they feel, those state hunting rules that they feel exceed the purposes for which those
And
parks
is that
were set up.
online?
Yeah, it's totally
Well, great.
online.
When we put this up on YouTube, we'll make sure that we
It's
link
completely
it.
online. And it's a very interesting
have it
article,
on.
and it sets out. I mean, the federal government isn't trying to overreach here. The federal government is just trying to do what they do in every other state in the union, and that is to look out for the wildlife that is on their land. And in most states, there is a cooperative relationship and a good discourse and discussion, but something's happened in this state where the Department of Fish and Game and the Board of Game are so far out there in that we hate the feds, all we want to do is grow moose and caribou, shoot all the wolves and bears, that that attitude has totally infected the way they manage, and the Park Service is kind of up against the wall going, well, we got to start pushing back, and fortunately we have the right president to support him.
Well, we will see. The Board of Game isn't quite set yet. They've got a confirmation next week. Thanks for coming in.
You bet. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We'll be right back with our panel.